Hello, everyone. Welcome back. And excuse the mess back here. I am obviously in a totally different office now. In fact, my family and I just moved into a larger space, which now allows me to actually be able to have my office in my home, which is really awesome. Before I was leasing out a place, and now we get to consolidate the rent from like home and office into just one place. So I'm really happy about that. We're still setting up back here, which is why it's a little messy, but I had to get this video out because I have just created, and I've been working on this for a little while, but I created a really good iteration of how to story hack a story, right? And what do I mean by that? So the idea behind story hacking, which is a big idea in my little ecosystem, because it's the name of my memberships. We've got Story Hacker Silver, Story Hacker Gold, which you can find links down to below. It's in the name, right? It's an important concept. And the idea from that is to learn from other stories that have come before us, because that's essentially what we do intuitively anyway. And if we do it more consciously, we can actually have a much greater chance of success. And a lot of people have done this. In fact, there's a whole term for it in the self-publishing community, which is writing to market, meaning we want to know what do readers want and then deliver on that in a kind of fresh and unique way, which just by virtue of you being the person creating that story, that alone is usually enough to give it a nice enough fresh take on the whole thing. And so I'm going to show you a little bit about this automation I created that makes the whole process much faster and easier, give you really interesting insights on any particular story. So let's start here by just checking out what this looks like. So I'm using make.com for this automation, although you could create another similar automation in another tool like N8N. I'll be sure to have more videos about N8N in the future as well. But this is a fairly simple, well, deceptively simple automation. So let me walk you through exactly what's happening here. So first of all, we start with a Google Doc, okay? And I'll show you what that Google Doc looks like. This is the Google Doc, and this is just a Google Doc of the script for Star Wars: A New Hope, which is the one that I typically test with because I know the story very, very well. So I can kind of get a good sense of how well it's doing it. And importantly, I have an H2 here. This is an H2 heading. If you're unfamiliar with H2 headings, if you like select a piece of text, you'll see up here in a Google Doc, it'll say normal text. But if I select this H2 heading, it says H2. And if you want to change your headings, you go here and just select between the different heading options. The reason I am using an H2 is, first of all, if you're in the web world, that's the standard heading for most headings that you get in a online article. And because I have a background in that, that's kind of how I started. It doesn't have to be an H2, but I'll show you exactly why I'm using an H2 later on. So I have an H2 here, and then this is the entire script of Star Wars: A New Hope. If you're interested in getting scripts like this, you can actually find quite a few of them online. There's a website, let me show you. It's called IMSDB. So similar to IMDb, but with an extra S thrown in the middle there. And this site is excellent. It has a ton of different scripts on there for both film and television. And if you don't find the script here, there's a good chance you can find the script somewhere else online. The scripts are usually very, very accessible. If you're trying to get a book in here, that's a little bit more complicated unless the book is in the public domain. You can go to a place like Project Gutenberg, that's gutenberg.org, which has a lot of the public domain books that you're likely to find. Archive.org has a bunch, and there are lots of different options to find public domain materials. If you're looking for a more recent copyrighted book, that's going to be a little bit trickier to do. There are ways to strip DRM off of a Amazon Kindle book, but that goes against their policies, and so it's not something you want them to catch you doing. And also, they've made it very, very difficult in recent months to do that. This video is not going to be about how to hack a Kindle or anything like that and how to get the text of a book that you bought. That's a whole nother discussion. But the idea is that you can take any document, if you have the document, put it in a Google Doc like this. And then the next step is to outline where the scenes are. And that's where I put these H2 headers. And it doesn't matter what it says here in this H2 header. I just went with scene break, but it could be anything as long as it is properly labeled as a H2 header. And this is admittedly the most tedious part of this process. It didn't take me very long, only about 15 minutes to label all of the scenes inside of Star Wars A New Hope because I knew the story very well. If you are unfamiliar with the story, it might take you a little bit longer. You might want to read through it. I would at least go watch the movie if you're doing a movie. And with books, it is a little bit easier because all you have to do is split it either at the chapter marks, well, definitely split it at the chapter divisions, but then also split it in any scene breaks that you see, which are usually very clearly labeled in a book. That's why it's a little bit easier. You don't actually have to go through and read the book to know when the scene breaks are most of the time. You can usually do okay with just putting your scene breaks at the chapter level or at the scene break level, which are all clearly marked. But with a script, I had to actually go through and say, okay, where's the scene break? And then I was like, okay, this is a good place for a scene break. With movies, it is a little bit tougher because sometimes they have small little scenes that are kind of like they just jump away for just a few lines of dialogue and then come back. In Star Wars, there's a good moment where we have Darth Vader saying, "This will be a day long remembered. It has seen the end of Kenobi and it will soon see the end of the rebellion." That's the whole mini scene right there. It's just that one line of dialogue because we're with the rebels, seeing what's going on with them, and then we briefly cut to Vader saying that line and Tarkin's there. But Tarkin doesn't say anything. So there are a lot of like little things like that where it's just like, I'm not going to make this a whole scene, but it sort of thematically ties into the scene before or the scene after. And so you do have to kind of figure out a little bit of judgment as like, where do these scenes end? And that's a little bit of a intuitive process. I can't necessarily tell you exactly what makes a scene end or begin. Usually it has to do with the shift in time or location. But again, like that mini scene in Star Wars, that was a huge shift in location, but not really a brand new scene. It's just sort of an addendum to the scene. So you kind of have to use your own judgment. But regardless, I went through, added these scene breaks in here. Sometimes they were longer scenes, sometimes they were shorter, but I just went through and added scene breaks. Funny enough, I found out later that I created 41 scenes here. I didn't know that until I had actually started the automation process. But if you've read my book, The Plot Module, you know I actually recommend 40 chapters or 40 scenes for a standard, not too complicated book. It's also what Blake Snyder recommends, 40 scenes for a film. And so I thought that was pretty fun that Star Wars came in right on the money with 41 scenes. And so that was pretty cool. Anyway, let's get into this. So once you have essentially prepped your document here with all of the scene breaks set up as H2s, all you have to do is now this part of the automation downloads that document. And the way I do that is I could have something set up where it just senses that there's a new document in a folder or something and automatically starts going. I find that to be less than efficient with the way Make works. I actually find it easier to just take the ID number of the document and just plug it in directly. And so the ID number can be found here in the URL. You just highlight this bit of text right here and then copy that. And then inside of this Google Docs automation here, what we're doing is we're downloading this as an HTML format file. That's important for later. And then you just copy and paste the document ID right into there. This also assumes that you have already created a connection to your Google Drive account inside of Make, which you will need to do prior to this, but that's a relatively simple setup. Then you put the document ID here, make sure that the type is HTML format, and hit save. And then from there, we go to the most complicated part of this whole system, which is this text parser, where it divides the document into individual sections based on those H2s. So that's where the H2s come in. It basically looks at all of the data in between those H2s. And then on each individual segment, so there, like I said, there's 41 of them for this one, for Star Wars, it will run a prompt on that section. And then it will loop back around and start doing that for every single section. And then this last little bit here essentially reassembles all of those pieces into one document, essentially. If we look at what this prompt does, so I have it connect to OpenRouter. You could also connect this to OpenAI or Anthropic or Google. Any of those would work for this process, but I like OpenRouter because I can use any of their models in there. Keeps all my billing in one central place. So I use it as often as I can. This is the prompt, and I'm not going to go through the whole thing here, but you'll get a sense of it. And if you do want to have access to this, it will be available inside of my Story Hacker Gold membership, link down below. So it says, you are an expert literary analyst tasked with analyzing and summarizing a chapter of fiction text or a scene from a novel or screenplay. Your goal is to accurately summarize each scene and provide details about the scene when asked that would be useful for other writers. So that's the system prompt, right? Then we get to the actual user prompt, which goes something like this. Here is the chapter/scene you will analyze. And then in brackets here, I have, or in HTML tags here, I have chapter text, which pulls the sections from this text parser. And again, it's splitting the document up based on the H2s. So it will give it 41 sections, essentially one at a time. And so you can think of this as like taking the first section here and running with that. And then I say, please follow these steps. Analyze the plot structure, the chapter scene, yada, yada, yada. Format the name of this. So I have some formatting things. This is not super important. Beneath the header, write a 4 to 5 sentence summary of the scene. So that's an important part. Use the character names instead of pronouns. Summarize the direct events of the scene only. Do not provide commentary of the scene. Format it as plot summary, followed by a 4 to 5 sentence summary of the scene chapter. And then in the next step, beneath the summary, list every character in the scene, what actions they take, and the want that they have in the scene. Format this as character summaries. Followed by a bulleted list of characters and their information. And the next step, beneath the character summaries, write out key setting and world building elements. So I have it do the same thing for setting and world building as I would for character. Beneath the setting and world building summaries, identify the main source of conflict/tension in the scene. So that's an important section as well. So I'm basically going through and listing all of the things that we would want to know about if we're to dissect the scene, what is going on there. Then I just add in, do not include any preamble or post-summary commentary of the scene. I just want the basic information there. And output everything as HTML. That's because we're going to be reassembling this into a new document, and having it output in HTML allows the text to be formatted inside of the Google Doc. So I always add this to the end of a lot of my outputs. I'm using GPT 4.1 Mini for this because I don't necessarily need a complicated heavy hitter to do all of this summarizing and things like that. It does a decent job of just like picking out the characters, summarizing the scenes. That's something that a low cost model can do. So I picked this one because it saves me a lot of money, and it's certainly sufficient for this particular task. But what we're doing is that we're essentially taking this ginormous 300-page document and boiling it down to just the essential information about each thing. By the way, I use the same method to create a story Bible using AI, where I essentially summarize an existing book into different categories like this. So we do that. I'll go ahead and save that. Once again, this text parser splits it up into sections. Each section then goes through the individual chapter analysis and then is reassembled at the end by this automation step right here. After the whole thing is being reassembled, I have it run through 2 more story analysis prompts. It's actually pretty simple. So the first one, if we look at this, I ask it to give me the genre. I ask it to give me a list of common tropes. I ask it to talk about the character arcs for the different characters, which it should be able to do because we listed out what happens to every character and their want in every scene, right? So it's able to look at that overall and see like what is the journey that this character has gone through over the course of the story. Then I ask it to identify the theme based on the summaries that we've given it, and any plot devices and foreshadowing. So things like detect the usage of foreshadowing, red herrings, Chekhov's guns, map setups and payoffs through the narrative, analyze flashbacks, if any, non-linear timelines or narrative framing devices, format this section as plot devices and foreshadowing, etc. So that's some useful information there. And then again, do not include any preamble or post commentary, and output in HTML. So for this one, I use Claude Sonnet 4 because I do want a heavier hitter for this, something that could do a deeper analysis of all of the summaries that we generated in the previous step. I do have it back up with Gemini 2.5 Pro just in case Claude Sonnet 4 is just not working. That's one of the nice things about using Open Router inside of Make is that you can have backups set up. in case one fails. So then we move on to the next story analysis, part 2. And this one is kind of fun. So I give it the chapter text of all of the different scene summaries that we did previously. And then I also give it the preliminary analysis that we did in the story analysis part 1. And then I ask it to follow these steps. I have it analyze the plot structure. And then basically I have it create a template for writing a scene-by-scene story that follows the same structure, but does so in a way where it kind of removes the story specific information. So it tries its best to remove anything about the genre or what have you. So you could use the same exact scene by scene outline template, but do it for any story that you want. If you want to just follow the same structure scene by scene as Star Wars or whatever scene you have. And that's what writing to market often is. It's figuring out what the tropes are and what the scene divisions are, and then writing something that's very, very similar to that. So I have it write out that template, and then I have it do some other things like beneath each summary, identify each of the following if needed in a bulleted list, like the scene's primary purpose. Is it advancing plot, revealing character, world building, thematic reinforcement, etc.? I have it flag multi-function scenes that deliver multiple purposes at once, which ideally every scene should do. Flag which scenes perform any of the following structural beats, including the hook, the inciting incident, the refusal, the call. I give it a bunch of these beats to flag so you know where the tentpole beats are. And then I end it the same way I do all of the others. Don't include any preamble or post commentary, and output in HTML. And then finally, after we've done all of that, we have it create a new document. And in this new document, I have it put part 1 of the story analysis. I have it put part 2 of the story analysis, which is that scene template. And then I actually, just to make sure we have all of that information available to us, I put the full scene summaries here. So once we have those full scene summaries and all of this information, it all gets dumped into one document. Let me show you what that looks like. So this is the document it made for Star Wars, and it did actually a really good job. So we had our initial analysis where it talked about genre, common tropes used, and a lot of these definitely are there. Humble beginnings, the MacGuffin, like the Death Star plans, definitely serve as the central focus that drives the plot. We have the mentor figure in Obi-Wan Kenobi, definitely very, at this point, almost cliche, like the old bearded mentor. At the level rogue with Han Solo, the damsel in distress, but that one, it notes, is subverted because while Princess Leia is captured and sends a distress call, she defies the traditional archetype. Definitely true. We have a list of character arcs in everybody. My favorite character arc in this film is actually Han Solo, where it says Han is introduced as a cynical, debt-ridden smuggler whose primary want is self-preservation and financial gain. True. He is skeptical of the rebellion's cause and the existence of the Force. His need is to find something to believe in and a family to belong to. Through his experiences with Luke, Leia, and Ben, he develops loyalty and friendship, which leads to his transformation from a detached rogue into a committed hero who risks his life to save his friends in the final battle. Very true. So that's a good summary of what his character arc was. And we have character arcs here for Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, Princess Leia, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Darth Vader. I did ask it to, if there isn't much of an arc, to actually kind of identify that, because sometimes characters don't have arcs. They exist to serve the story from a kind of archetypal standpoint. And so you might see that here as well. I have it identify the theme. The central theme was trusting in something greater than oneself versus relying on technology and cynicism. I'd say that is a pretty decent stab at what the theme of Star Wars is. There's definitely a lot of like trusting your feelings versus, Han's skepticism of hokey religions and the Empire's focus on technology, all of that. Then we have the list of plot devices, and then here's that scene-by-scene template. So this is where I try to get it to not reference the story directly, but to give us just a opening that could be a little bit more general so you could use it in any story. Think of Aragon, for example, as really derivative of Star Wars, but is still its own unique story. It's a totally different genre even. So I'll just show you scene 1 here. Introduction to the conflict. That's a good title for it. The story opens with a direct and overwhelming confrontation showing a small group of rebels being crushed by the antagonist's vastly superior forces. This immediately establishes the stakes, the power disparity between the factions, and introduces the primary antagonist as a physically imposing and ruthless figure. Viewpoint characters who are not combatants are caught in the crossfire, providing a ground-level perspective of the chaos and desperations. So yeah, it doesn't reference any of the characters or specifics of the scene itself. The only thing that comes close is mentioning that there is a group of rebels, but that's a pretty common trope in a lot of different genres. And then we have the purpose, which is plot advancement, world building, and thematic reinforcement. reinforcement. The structural beat is the hook. Definitely, 100%. This is a multifunction scene that introduces the central conflict, the antagonist power, and the MacGuffin that will drive the plot. Yep, it does a good job of kind of identifying all of that here, and then it gives us a similar analysis for every scene. If we scroll all the way down, here we go to scene 41, which is the final hero's welcome. And then finally here we have a full scene summary. So this is all of the information that it generated in those first few steps, where it's actually summarizing each scene. This can be useful if you just want to read through it to understand the scene a little bit better and what it's doing. But there's a lot more information here per scene. As you can see here, like all of this is just scene 1 right there. So we have the rest. We're already on like page 14 here out of 60. So the vast majority of this document is the full scene summary. If you have that available to you, if you want to dive deeper, but you could also just use what you learn here in these first few pages, which I find to be super useful. So as I mentioned, this story hack system, I will be sharing it inside of the Story Hacker Gold group, which is my most elite group, and sharing the JSON files for this so you could use the same type of prompts inside of Make Yourself. I will also be sharing all of the story hacks in that group. I did put the story hack for Star Wars in both groups, in the silver and the gold group. The silver group is a lot cheaper if you want to just dip your toe into this stuff, but I'm not going to be sharing the automations in there because that's a lot more advanced and you need to have a little bit of foundational knowledge to get into that. But if you want to just dip your toe in, see if my stuff is right for you, go ahead and check out the silver group. If not, you can go ahead and upgrade to the gold group and see what that is like for you. So that is it for this particular story hack. And I do plan on releasing a lot more hacked stories like this, maybe at least one a week or something like that inside of the gold group, so you can see more besides just the Star Wars one here. So if that's been useful for you, I hope you'll go ahead and do all the YouTube stuff down below, join the group, whatever, and I will see you in the next video.